Hi guys, welcome to the Escarpment Labs YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about hazy IPAs, specifically two of the yeasts that are most popular for this style of beer, and that is the Foggy London Ale and the Vermont Ale. One of the most common questions that we get at Escarpment Labs is which yeast someone should choose for their hazy IPA, and oftentimes they're choosing between one of these two yeasts. Do they want Vermont for sort of those peachy, fruity notes, a little bit of a drier fermentation? Do they want Foggy London for more rounded flavor profile, maybe helping to let some of those tropical fruit notes from the hops stand out? So one of the things that we do when we're trying to answer these questions is we do exactly what you do. We brew a beer. We test it out. In this case, what I've got here is a split batch fermentation that we did. I made a hazy IPA, pretty sort of standard recipe, 2-row malt, a little bit of flaked oats, a little bit of wheat as well in there. Lots of hops in the whirlpool, some Bravo, some Cascade, some Citra. Lots of Citra and Mosaic in the dry hop as well. The hops really do steal the show here and help to make sure that that beer stays hazy. But of course, the yeast plays a really important part here too. So we pitched our Foggy London Ale and our Vermont Ale, fresh homebrew pitches of both of these yeasts into that split batch, just sort of a homebrew size split batch fermentation. These were all dry hopped, just sort of towards the end of fermentation, with a little bit left to go in the fermentation. I think maybe they were both dry hopped around 10-18. They both finished around 10-12, 10-14. Sort of somewhere between Pale Ale and IPA in terms of strength. These came in around 5.5% alcohol. So really the only variable here at play is the yeast strain. So we had Foggy London in there and Vermont. And I just sort of want to walk through some of the typical characteristics that I usually find in these two strains. So the first beer that I have here is our Vermont Ale strain. Sort of famous for having this sort of peachy, fruity expression. For really when the yeast is healthy, just charging through wort. It can finish a ferment 3 or 4 days, no problem, if the yeast is really healthy. So when I smell the beer, one of the first things that I notice is a really sort of bright grapefruit zest kind of characteristic. This is something that I get a lot from Vermont, especially when it's combined with hops. You get this kind of fresh, citrusy thing going on. There's a little bit of biotransformation. Really integrated kind of flavor that's really lifted up by the yeast. And I'm getting some more of like the tropical fruit as well. Flavor profile, really balanced, I would say. Not necessarily too bitter, not necessarily too sweet. Really kind of just a classic, what I would call classic hazy New England IPA. So our Foggy London, on the other hand, what's different about it? The first thing that I notice is that I would say that the aroma is not quite as intense. It might be a little bit more distinct of the hops that were put in, of the Mosaic and of the Citra. So it's got a bit of that Mosaic, blueberry, Fruit Loops kind of thing. A little bit of this that sort of pungent Citra note as well. And when I taste it, I do notice a difference here. The flavor's a little bit more rounded, a little bit more sweet. This beer did finish at a higher finishing gravity. Typically, the Foggy London Ale only attenuates about 70 to 75% versus Vermont, which is more in the 75 to 85% range. So definitely less attenuation with the Foggy London Ale, typically leaving a bit more of a sweeter, fuller, rounder finish. So kind of just depends what you're going for. For my own personal preference, I do give a slight edge to the Vermont just because I really love that grapefruit, peachy kind of aroma. Although I do think that the Foggy London beer is very rounded. It would be very crushable. I think that the Foggy London does downplay the bitterness of all these hops a little bit better. But all in all, I think they're both really tasty beers. They're both capable of making great beers, and we do encourage brewers to try these kinds of experiments themselves so that you know from your own experience which of these yeasts that you prefer. Both of these yeasts can be used to make, lovely, hazy, beautiful beers. And these aren't the only yeasts that you can use to make hazy IPAs either. I know that these are the really popular ones, but there's a lot of other options out there. We really love our Cerberus strain for its biotransformation capabilities. We really love Kveik because they'll ferment really fast. I mean, I've heard of people dry hopping, you know, basically the second day because it's that close to being finished fermenting. So there's a lot of benefit, especially as we get into the summer months, of being able to turn around these beers really, really quickly with some of these fruitier Kveik strains like Ebegarden and Hornindal. And of course, you know, we can't talk about it, but we're also working on some new stuff. We have a pretty good sense of what brewers are looking for in an ideal IPA yeast, and we are working behind the scenes to try to make some more yeasts available that can help brewers to hit these kinds of targets, make these beers easier, tastier, a little bit more distinct, and ultimately really start to innovate in sort of the hoppy beer world, because, you know, we have to recognize with these kinds of beers that yeast is a really important part of the equation. It's not just the hops. If the yeast is not happy or if it's the wrong strain, you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. So really excited to see what comes. But in the meantime, would recommend experimenting with both of these strains. Really, they're both awesome for this type of beer. It does come down to personal preference. And if you want to know anything more, just give us a shout, shoot us an email, send us a message. We'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Cheers!